Hey, good morning.
Hello,
Morning.
how's everything going?
Yeah, it's good. Good. I'm in my social distancing routine.
Awesome.
Well, I'll tell you, this is some exciting stuff. I mean, from a big picture standpoint, the I guess the protests to not infringe on people's freedom.
Yes.
And I hope it works out, but if it doesn't, holy cow.
Well,
Holy cow.
I, I was, I hadn't heard anything, so I heard that these protests were supposed to happen here in Kansas City, and then I didn't hear anything, and so last night I went looking for news coverage of the Kansas City reopen Missouri protests,
Yeah,
and like only 60 people showed up. So
good, good.
I guess I'm glad that at least in Missouri, perhaps cooler heads are prevailing. Uh,
It's like I'm thinking, and I haven't had a chance to follow it too close. I just knew they were happening in
yeah,
several states, and and everyone, it's like you don't hear the second half of the sentence that you really wish you would hear, which is, "Hey, we want to open the economy and get back to work, and we promise we'll wear our masks and we'll keep our distance and we'll do all this stuff."
yeah.
I'm not hearing that responsible second half of the sentence, and so I'm thinking, holy cow.
Well, and it could be because it's not there, or it could be because it's not or being reported. But I'm
Oh
guessing
yeah,
it's
yeah.
probably not there
That's kind
actually.
of yeah. That's kind of
So,
where I'm at. Yeah, it's yeah. It'll
how's
be
everybody doing?
Pretty good, just sticking to the same routine every day.
It's the same thing day after day, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah, I was talking to my girlfriend, and we were discussing what we were going to be doing the next day, and we were like, wait a minute, what is tomorrow? Is tomorrow Tuesday or is tomorrow Wednesday? And then when I had to look at the calendar, and oh, tomorrow's Wednesday. I'm going to class.
Yeah. My brother always asks, "So, what's going on today?" Well, it's the same thing we did yesterday. So,
Same thing we did yesterday. Um, Connor, how are you? Connor,
I'm good.
good. Athos,
I'm pretty good. How about you?
doing okay. You're still on campus?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Maddie, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. You sound very chipper.
Yeah, I just had coffee.
Oh, awesome. Brady, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Yep. Tired.
Tired? What are you tired from?
Waking up early.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Chase, you doing all right? Chase is with us, but I cannot hear him.
I'm here.
Good. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing all right. I don't see Bryce and Karen. I'm not sure what their deal is. So I'm gonna deviate a little bit today from what I had planned. I'm still gonna get to what I had planned, but something came out yesterday that I want us as developing statisticians to pay attention to. So go to the Moodle site, and on the Moodle site, you will find in today's materials, if you go to the April 19th to April 25th week, you're going to see a PDF called VA NIH U Virginia COVID hydroxychloroquine preprint. Go and open that thing up so that we are all looking at it together. and I'm going to share my screen with you so you guys can follow along. All right. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So this is a preprint that I guess hit the news wires yesterday. So one thing you should know about these archives. So there's a website called bioRxiv. This is a website called medRxiv, and it's archive RXIV. These are places where people put preprints of research that they're submitting for publication so that they can get it out there before it's been peer reviewed. So this is not yet a peer reviewed study. And so I wanna predicate this conversation with that. But this was a study that was funded by the National Institutes of Health. It was approved by the VA healthcare system. Went through all of their review protocols, et cetera, et cetera. It's conducted by researchers at the NIH and at the University of Virginia. So that's the context of who's generating this. And basically, it's looking at the health outcomes of veterans in the VHA health in VHA medical centers who had verified cases of COVID-19. And it has divided them up. So this is a retrospective study. So they did this after the fact, and they went back and looked at medical records from March 9th to April 11th of this year. So very, very quick turnaround on this particular study, which is also, of course, why they're putting it out on a preprint rather than waiting for peer review. And they were able to divide people into 3 different classes: people who had been given hydroxychloroquine, which is this anti-malarial drug that is also used to treat lupus and some other things. So that was one group of patients. One group of patients got hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, which is an antibiotic. And then another group who didn't get any of those drugs and were just given supportive management for COVID-19. And it looked at 2 primary outcomes: did you die, and did you need to be put on a mechanical ventilator? And so the results are here. And so they had 368 male patients. They only had, I think, something like 17 female patients. And so they just removed females from the mix altogether. These are VA patients, and so they're all old. The median age was 70, 69, and 68. And we'll look at those data in a few minutes. So these are all older patients. So once again, that's a limitation of the study, is it doesn't really have young people in the mix. So they have pretty good sample sizes: 97 hydroxychloroquine, 113 hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and I have these figures up on my board, and 158 with no hydroxychloroquine. And when you look at the rates of ventilation, they found no differences in the rates of ventilation needing. But when you look at the death rates, and they analyze this with a chi-square analysis, so this is the kind of statistical test that you are familiar with, they actually found that the hydroxychloroquine group was much more likely to die than getting no drugs at all. And so if you scroll on through this paper, it gets to the methods, and the methods are useful to read. I woke up early this morning and gave this whole thing a quick read. Looking at the study population, they had a ton of covariates that they looked at, which we'll look at in a minute, and basically went through and tried to remove as many complicating factors as they could statistically. And what I want you guys to pay attention to is here at the end, where they present their data analyses. So this would be on page 16. So categorization of patients based on pre-ventilation treatment. So it has the numbers of patients there. then on the next page, it has all of these characteristics that might be important. So things like age. And you see that the median age is 70, 68, and 69. Those are not different from one another across these three groups. So what you're going to see in this table, table 2, is a ton of analyses of variance on these characteristics of the study population. What was the body mass index? Basically, all of these guys were overweight, technically overweight based on their BMI. But there were no differences among groups, once again. Azithromycin, obviously some people had azithromycin in their bloodstream, but once again, there were no differences among, there were differences among the groups, especially in the group that had been receiving azithromycin. So they have all of these things that might be important. Most of these things end up not being significantly different across the groups if you scroll down the p-values. Systolic blood pressure is somewhat higher in the group that died. Difficult to tell whether that's a complication of COVID or if that was a pre-existing condition. So you can scroll down here and you can look at the p-values and see that the vast majority of these things are not different. Was there a difference in the frequency of smoking? No. Asthma? No. Congestive heart failure is approaching significance, but the group that survived the best actually had the highest rate. So it's good to see that a lot of these complicating factors don't vary across the different groups, because if they did, then you would have to once again take this study with a little more grain of salt than you would otherwise. And then these are the death rates. So these are the outcomes. They looked at death, and these are the raw numbers, and then they have the percentages out next to the numbers. And those values are significantly different using a chi-square test to compare what you would expect to see given the overall average death rate. And then the same thing with ventilation. The need for ventilation was not significantly different from one another. And so what I want you to get out of kind of taking a quick perusal of this study is that the kind of statistics that you guys have been learning in this class, which is basically analysis of variance and chi-square analysis, are being used to look at very recent data that has to do with something that we're all collectively dealing with. And then the other thing that I would like to use this for is to impress upon you guys that you now don't have a ton of knowledge about statistics, but you have a ton more knowledge than most people walking around in the population. And I think with that knowledge comes some responsibility. You guys know that I bicycle. So I was bicycling yesterday with a friend of mine, and I hadn't seen him in quite some time. I probably hadn't seen him since January. And he texted me and he's like, "It's a beautiful day. You want to go for a bike ride?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So because I'm a scientist, he peppers me with questions about things. And of course, what's on everybody's mind is our current state of being. And so when I talk to him as a scientist. And so I'm trying to qualify the things that I say, even though we're on a casual bike ride, about our current situation, because I know that he's going to take what I say differently than if he's listening to a newscaster or a politician or something like that. Because quite frankly, I've got no investment in this game whatsoever. I'm not going to profit from anything. I don't do medical research or anything else. But what I can do is I can look at numbers. And so as educated citizens, I think we have kind of a responsibility to be the voice of reason in it seems like an increasingly unreasonable world. And so here's a study. And what it basically says, and assuming that it stands up to peer review, although once again, going through the methods, and you have the methods right there in front of you as well, I suspect that it will pass the processes of peer review. And it basically says, you probably shouldn't be taking hydroxychloroquine because two things. One, it doesn't help you get better from COVID-19. And two, it actually has a higher probability of killing you, especially if you're in an older cohort of Americans, these people who are, in their 60s, late 60s and early 70s. And so the reason that we should not listen to politicians and fake doctors like Dr. Oz, who are basically just hawking whatever they feel like they can make money off of. The reason you shouldn't believe those people is because they're not basing what they say on actual data, on numbers, on studies that have a large number of participants. These were 368 participants, that has a big enough sample size that you can actually make inferences about the population that you're trying to make inferences about. And I realized at the beginning of the semester, you guys probably got tired of me talking about the whole purpose of gathering a sample is that hopefully that sample is representative of the population that you're attempting to make an inference about. And only when you get sample sizes up to a certain size can you make those inferences accurately. And in this case, the sample size is far beyond that baseline limit. And it's these kinds of studies where you have lots of participants so that you can get samples that are big enough that you can make accurate inferences about the population. Only then can you actually evaluate whether or not something is safe and effective. And hydroxychloroquine is probably not safe and effective based on this study and a couple of other preliminary studies that are coming out about this. And so as people who have been trained somewhat on how to look at data, I think it's important for us to go through and look at the methodology of this study and say, okay, does this methodology seem reasonable? And then go through and look at the data. And they're fairly transparent in the way that they're presenting the data. They're giving you the raw values and they're giving you the results of all of the statistical tests in one fairly drawn out table, but it's all there for you to see. And then the main tests, which are these chi-square tests, you could go back and reproduce those chi-square tests yourself and see if you're getting the same results that they're getting. And one of the nice things about science is it has this level of transparency associated with it. You guys have the ability to look at those tables that my mother cannot. Nothing against my mother, I love her, but she drives me crazy sometimes. And she would not be capable of looking at this paper, going through the data tables and saying, okay, this seems like a reasonable study and we should probably trust it. Or this seems like a totally bogus, thrown together piece of shit and we should not pay attention to it. I have the qualifications to be able to do that. You, to a certain degree, also have some training and some qualification to be able to do that. My mother does not. Therefore, when I talk to my mother, I need to say, please don't take hydroxychloroquine because you're afraid of getting coronavirus, because it has all of these negative side effects. And if you do have coronavirus, chances are it's going to increase your rate of death rather than decrease your rate of death. And I don't know, there comes a point where, and now I feel like I'm ranting a little bit. Am I ranting? You guys can be honest with me because we're online, we're not in person. All in favor of people who think I'm ranting? In your participants tab, raise your hand.
Where's that?
Go to your participants tab and you can is Paul ranting? Yes, he's ranting. You can click a yes thing. As an educated person, we have a responsibility to society in general. And as a person who has been trained in data and data analysis and how to look at data, I think we, at times like this, have a special responsibility to be able to look at statements coming out of people's mouths who don't have training in science, don't have training in statistics, and basically saying, yeah, I don't know that I'm going to believe you until I actually see some data. And when you show me your data, I'm going to ask a lot of questions about those data. And if I don't like those data because they really don't conform to what I know data should be like in terms of the way it was collected and the way it was analyzed, I'm still not going to believe those data until you give me some good data that I know conform to how data should be analyzed and how data should be collected. And unfortunately, in this case, having no data, which is what we know about hydroxychloroquine up until just about a week ago when these studies started coming out, having no data and then acting on having no data, not only is it just kind of bad policy, it actually risks getting people killed.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
I think I saw a news article about this yesterday.
Yeah,
And-
that's why
and it-
I went and read it
oh.
overnight.
Yeah, so the media, the news profession can just grab something that it did not. I don't think it said it was still a draft or
Yeah.
unreviewed.
So
in the news articles, so that's kind of cheesy. But then so that's one thing is how the
Mhm.
news. I guess the news can just grab an unreviewed article and blast it out there in the media.
Sure.
But then a week ago, I saw some human interest article on the press about one lady in like Arizona who claims her life had been saved by hydroxychloroquine.
This is
so
the
that-
difference between this is once again one of the things that you want to take away from a class like this, the difference between anecdote and data.
Right, yeah. So then now for my real question. Way
Yeah.
back up in the methods
Yeah.
paragraph, says it's a retrospective analysis.
Yep. Which means that they went back after these people had either died or been discharged, and they basically chose a window and said, we're going to arbitrarily say this is a window, and we're going to take all of the complete records from that window. So
Right.
if you were admitted on April 10th and you're still in treatment, you're not in this study because you haven't either been discharged or been put on a ventilator or died.
But it also, this retrospective nature of it,
Mm-hmm.
it also means they weren't random about how they assigned people to the different treatments.
No, they were not random. And that
And-
is,
And I'll guarantee you, in a hospital, they're going to take the worst patient who looks like they're just about to expire and try the Hail Mary hydroxychloroquine on them.
sure. And so one of the things that you have to look at is up in the methods. It basically talks about that in the methods in terms of whether you were classified in the hydroxychloroquine group because it was administered at the very end versus whether it was administered early on as a form of treatment.
Yeah.
And so once again, they are attempting to control for those sorts of things.
Well, how I don't see them controlling for. I mean,
Yeah.
the probably what in plain language really happened is the doctor made some on-the-fly decision that the guy
Sure.
that was nearest to death was going to get the experimental drug.
I suspect that, but they weren't experimenting with it. So this is one of the things about retrospective. This was probably given to people because the people were asking for it at this particular time in the whole thing. So when you look in the more detailed methods section, so there's a short method section at the very top, and there's a more detailed methods section. And when you look at the, let me see if I found it. So under outcomes and exposure coding, when it talks about, and this is on page 7, when it talks about these hospital codes. So since everything is now computerized, everything is coded into a computer. And so you can look at ventilator usage, what drugs a patient got, and things like this. So patients were exposed to hydroxychloroquine if they had dispensed a drug from the VA barcode medication administration data file during their hospitalization. Similar, patients receiving azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine during their hospitalization. To examine the association with ventilation, the time of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin dispense, these things were coded dynamically before or after ventilator support. And so they know whether this was a hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin dispensing that was an end of the line, you're going on a ventilator, we're going to throw everything at it, versus whether it was done earlier on in the treatment. And that's in the last sentence before you get to covariates. So those are all valid points. They're attempting to control for those things. And then one of the other things that you'll want to read if you want to spend some time with this paper and kind of see how people talk about these things, they have a whole paragraph down in the discussion where they talk about the limitations of the study. And so our study has certain, just to go back to what Tom said, our study has certain limitations, including those inherent to all retrospective analyses, such as non-randomization of treatments.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so 2 things, Tom, about what you said about news reports. Any news outlet that is doing a news report about this study that is not calling attention to the fact that it has not yet been peer reviewed, you should probably stop listening to that news outlet.
Yeah.
Because they're not being completely forthcoming with the news that they're reporting. When I started talking about this thing, what's the first thing that I did?
Yeah. Put out the disclaimer.
I said,
disclaimer, yeah.
This is on a site. It has not been peer reviewed. I went and read it. After reading it, I think it's worth paying attention to. So I think as we digest news, as we get news from places, and this is for all of us actually, I think it's important for us to think critically about the news that we're receiving. If you see news coverage of this paper in the coming days, and it will probably get a lot of news coverage, one of the things that you should ask yourself is, well, what exactly are they saying about this paper? Are they calling attention to the fact that it is a preprint? Are they calling attention to the fact that it is on medRxiv and has not yet gone through the peer review process? If they're not, then they're basically not disclosing information that is important for you to evaluate their news fully. And I think you want to be getting your news from trustworthy sources rather than non-trustworthy sources. And that's one level of determining, one way of determining the trustworthiness of a news outlet. This is a time when we all need to be thinking critically about what we're doing and the decisions that are being made by governments and health organizations and things like this. And supposedly you guys go to school at the critical thinking college. And this is a classic time to exercise the critical thinking parts of our brains. Anyway, any questions about this? You guys have been very silent while I have ranted on. Anyway, it's up there and it's available to you if you feel like taking a deeper dive into it. It's interesting, if nothing more than just the fact that it presents a lot of statistics, but they're basically F-tests and chi-square tests, with the exception of some model that they ran, that's some epidemiological model that I'm not familiar with. But a lot of the statistics in the paper are totally accessible to you guys now. And be wise and be safe, essentially. All right. Um, on the Moodle site, I have also put your linear regression problem set. There are 3 problems. 2 of them are pretty small. 1 of them is larger, but they're all capable of being worked by hand. And since my exploration into chicken raising has become something of a topic on these meetings, there is a chicken related question on the problem set.
You chicken, you.
So anyway, that'll be due next Wednesday, so you'll have a week to work on that, and then I'm still putting together the report assignment, which will actually be due the following week. So you'll have a week to work on that. What I want to do today with you is run through one of the examples in your textbook. So it's the example that I called attention to on today's Wednesday, on Monday. I'm losing the days. So there is a script and a data file in Moodle. So if you want to pull that up and follow along, you can. But basically, this is a data set in your book in this forest dynamics after fragmentation project that is down in South America. It's a place that back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, deforestation was moving into the Brazilian Amazon. And as this was happening, a group of scientists said, hey, we have an opportunity to go and look at what the influences of land use change are, converting primary rainforest to agriculture. And so what they did is they went out ahead of the advancing front of deforestation, and they cleared some areas around some forest fragments. So they just cut a strip of land around a forest fragment, and they made these perfectly square blocks of forest that then, as deforestation advanced, those forest fragments became more and more isolated over time. And now they're interested in whether or not these forest fragments support different levels of diversity and abundance of different kinds of species. So there are hundreds of people that work on this project, and they're following it over decades of time to see, when you take what was a gigantic forest and you break it down into small fragments, what happens to the diversity of organisms in those fragments, and does the nature of the fragments themselves have anything to do with those outcomes? And so they have the data on diversity and abundance of birds, but then they also have all of this data, all of these data that are the characteristics of the plots themselves. And so when you read in the data file, you see that there's a ton of stuff here. The abundance, the area of the fragment, the year that it was isolated, the distance to the nearest forest fragment, the distance to the nearest large forest fragment, the grazing intensity, the altitude, the logarithms of the distance. So because area and distance are things that should be scaled appropriately, they took logarithms, etc. And so they have all of these data about the plots themselves. And so one of the things that you can do is you can look at data sets quickly and easily by basically just subsetting it into, what did I do? Subsetting it into a set of subsets, and then so now I've reduced the data set to only the things that are actually being analyzed in your textbook, and then I can get a correlation plot. And so here in this plot, in the plotting window, it basically has the correlation between abundance and grazing intensity, abundance and altitude. And what you see is that in many cases, these things are not correlated with one another, but in a couple of cases, these things are correlated with one another. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use multiple regression to figure out which of these variables is correlated with the abundance of birds in this case. There's also a package called Performance Analytics that you could use to do the same thing. Oh yeah, I don't want to reload. I discovered that I didn't have that package in my R any longer. So yesterday when I was going through this. And so once again, it shows you histograms of the data. It shows you correlations. Most of these correlations are not significant, but a couple of them actually turn out to be significant. And so this is just another way of envisioning your data. But the best way to do this is to actually just run the test. And so here we're going to look at.
Hey,
Yeah.
Paul, real quick, back to this graphic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff in that thing.
Yeah, and so this is a quick and easy way to get a look at what your data look like.
What are the? Okay, so I see the data lower left. I see the data points, and then they throw
Yep.
in a red line that kind of gives it a curve.
This is a LOES model. It's a local regression model
Okay,
that we
And
haven't
then-
talked about.
and then in the diagonal, that's the histogram of normality.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay, cool. And then up in the top right half,
These are the actual correlation coefficients and their significance. So
so that'd be the slope.
this
that
is a slope
red
of minus
line.
0.68. This is the slope of this figure right here.
Okay, and then look at 0.68. 3 red stars is very
That's a
significant,
highly significant slope value.
and that's also the font size. Is that
Yes, font size is also
That's cool.
also scaled.
all right? That's wow. That's a heck of a chart right there. Whoa. Okay. And
So
if it's look at the very top
Yep.
row. If it's continuous data, there's nothing. But if it's like there's a scale on some of them, like a 1, 3, 5.
Yeah, let's see. No, there's a scale at the top,
Yeah.
and then at the bottom is the scale for the other one.
Oh. Okay. Got it.
So that
Okay.
so it reduces clutter
I'm just looking
on
at
the
s-
axes.
Look at the second row column.
Second
column.
Second column. Yep.
That data lines up in vertical slices, so it must be like interval data.
Yeah. So this is a grazing intensity scale. If you go and read the description in the book, they talk about a grazing intensity scale, and so
Okay.
they basically arbitrarily assign numerical values to how intensively it was grazed after it was cleared.
Okay, so that's interval data, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool chart.
So basically, we're going to look at abundance and see how abundance is affected by the area of the fragment, the distance to the next nearest fragment, the distance to the next nearest larger fragment, the grazing intensity, the altitude, the year that it was isolated. Obviously, the longer ago it was isolated, the more time the effects of isolation might it's had more time to have an effect on diversity and abundance. And so this is a multiple regression looking at how all of these predictor variables influence the response variable that is abundance. And when we run that, we get the summary of the model. And what you see is that the only thing that really matters is the area in terms of determining abundance. And this is a well-established idea in biology that the larger the area that you have, the greater abundance and diversity of species that you have. And then this is borne out with the data. And so that's the only thing that is significant. It looks like grazing intensity begins to approach significance, but isn't quite there yet. And if you look at that box in your textbook, you're going to see that all of these slope coefficients are the same, and all of these p-values are also the same. This model explains quite a lot of the variation. 68% of the variation is explained. Obviously, most of that variation is being explained by area, and we can do summary AOV, and we can actually see the sums of squares to evaluate kind of how much of that is actually due to area. And you see that most of the sums of squares is accounted for by area. All of these other things are relatively small in terms of the sum of squares explained by each of them, which makes total sense given the data set. So you could subset this into other different groups, but basically area is the thing that is having the biggest effect. And if you don't believe that, you can then go and actually plot that, which is down here. And this is the log base 10 of area as abundance varies, and you can see that that's actually a pretty decent fit. The bigger the area you have, the more abundance you have of in this case, bird species. When people have looked at these same plots with lizard species and frog species and insect species, beetles and things like this, these same relationships come out of this whole thing. And so multiple regression allows you to basically take lots of things that could be affecting a response variable, and it asks, which of those things is actually informative about the response variable that you are interested in. And once again, it's doing this in such a way that it looks independently at the effect of area, independent of the effect of distance and distance to the next largest fragment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a pretty useful technique. And, but it relies on all the same ideas that simple linear regression does. It's just now that you're dealing with more X variables to define what the Y variable is. Questions?
If you were to take out the area independent variable, would it then kind of zoom in and magnify the others? And so, see, I guess what I'm saying.
No, it wouldn't actually. All of that variance that is explained by area would go into the residual category. So,
okay.
So when we look at the ANOVA table, we see this 3,471. I forgot my other earphones, so I'm gonna have to step away from the computer for a minute. Let's see. So I just took the sums of squares due to area and added it to sum of squares residual up on the board.
Okay.
If we take out area and rerun this, what we should see in the summary data is that now grazing is significant because we've restructured some things and it wasn't significant a minute ago. But what we should see is that all of that sums of squares, well, not all the sums of squares. So some of the variation that was in area is also explained by grazing. So we didn't get a strict addition of the variance explained by area added to sums of squares residual.
Back at the cool chart, there was a big correlation between grazing and
There is, yep.
area. Okay. See, I guess what I was thinking was area. I mean, to a practitioner, I can't do a whole lot about area. So
Yeah, sure.
but I can do something about grazing.
Yeah.
And so take out the area and now tell me what's the important driver.
Yeah.
Of the drivers I can do something, take action on. What are the
Sure.
drivers that are important?
And then from a statistical standpoint, that must mean that grazing intensity and area must also be correlated with one another so that they're somewhat collinear, because a chunk of the variation that is explained by area is also explained by grazing, which is why you didn't see all of the sums of squares from area going into residual sums of squares. But you saw a good amount of it. You know, another 1,000 sums of squares went into residual. And so of that 3471, a portion of that now is explained by grazing, and the rest that is unexplained went into the residual term. So the residual term has gone from 1997 to 3056. That difference in between 1997 and 3056 is the amount of variation that was explained exclusively by area. So questions about any of that? All right. There's one other thing that is just a pet peeve of mine. I teach about this in my ecology of food class as, once again, a way of thinking about data. I made the point when we were talking about the whole COVID thing that you are now equipped with a set of numerical skills that allow you to look at claims in an objective sort of way. And politicians irritate the crap out of me. And so I oftentimes, because I am insane, take what politicians say and I go and find data about that. And I test whether or not what they said is true. And in a depressingly large number of times, I find that politicians are, quite frankly, full of shit. People talk about coal. Coal miners have been going out of business for ages. Coal jobs have been lost throughout Appalachia and in Kentucky, et cetera, et cetera. And some people want to bring coal back, which I think is a terrible idea. Coal pollutes. Coal is dangerous for coal miners. Methods of coal mining that aren't dangerous for coal miners are devastating for the environment. I think just coal is a really bad idea, in my opinion. So some people want to bring back coal. I think that's a bad idea. And some people say that one of the things that has led to a decline in coal mining jobs throughout the United States is environmental protections put in place by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I asked myself a couple of years ago, what exactly is correlated with coal jobs? So you can go to the Energy Information Agency, the EIA, which is a federal, a US government data organization that basically gathers data about the energy sector. And from that, you can go and you can get data on, for example, the date, how many people were employed in coal mining. You can get the wellhead price of natural gas, for example. You can get the consumer price of natural gas, and you can get the total coal that is being produced. My original thought was that EPA action isn't putting coal miners out of business. Cheap natural gas is putting coal miners out of business, and also changes in the nature of coal mining as we have moved away from shaft mines that require you to send tons of coal miners down into shafts has given way to mountaintop removal and strip mining. Both mountaintop removal and strip mining are much more labor efficient than shaft coal mines, because you put one guy in a gigantic crane and he just scrapes the earth off the coal seam, reveals the coal seam, scoops that up, dumps it into these giant dump trucks that then haul the coal away. It requires many fewer people to strip mine and do mountaintop removal than it does to dig a shaft into the earth and extract coal that way. So my hypothesis is that alternative fuel sources that are cheaper and cleaner, like natural gas, combined with changes in production methods, have led to declines in coal mining. I'm going to go back to the board, and I can't hear you because I forgot my other headphones. But I'm going to continue talking. So if mining technology has changed coal employment, what you should see is that if the movement to mountaintop removal and surface mining has led to declines in coal employment, what you should see is that there should be, as coal productivity goes up from little amounts of coal to a lot being produced, as that goes up, coal employment should go down. And so you should see a negative relationship between coal productivity and coal employment. If my hypothesis about changing technology for extraction of coal is true, and if the shift away from coal to cleaner, cheaper forms of fuel is also responsible for coal jobs, if we look at the price of natural gas from cheap to expensive, and coal employment, when natural gas is cheap, coal employment should be low, and when natural gas is expensive, coal employment should be high. So you should see a positive relationship between the price of natural gas and the number of coal miners being employed. Did you guys follow all of that? Anybody not following? Okay, then let's actually test this. So we can use regression. We can say, to what degree are coal jobs correlated with coal production? And what we find when we do that is we find that they are negatively correlated with one another. So strangely enough, in the coal industry, the fewer coal miners you have, the more coal you're capable of producing. The only thing that can account for that really is changes in the technology involved in coal mining. Let's look at coal jobs as it is determined by the consumer price, the price to the consumer of natural gas, which is different than the wellhead price. Oftentimes the wellhead price, which is the price that wholesalers sell their natural gas for, is different from the consumer price. And when we do that model, what do we see? We see that there is a significant and positive correlation between the price of natural gas and the employment of coal miners. It doesn't explain a ton of the variation, but it's significant. And once again, the coal production, coal jobs correlation is not particularly good at explaining variation. So there's a lot of other variation floating around out there that is not explained. But what we can do is we can look at coal jobs as it's influenced by wellhead price, consumer price, and coal production all together and run a multiple regression. And what we find when we do that is those three things in combination explain quite a lot of the variation. And as it turns out, all of those things are significant. So when people say that mining jobs are being lost because of X or Y, there are data that you can look at and say, okay, well, what is actually probably being implicated in the loss of coal jobs? Well, it's due to a shifting nature of the energy mix that we use in the United States, where coal has been replaced over time by cheaper, more affordable, cleaner burning natural gas. If natural gas were more expensive, people would not be closing down coal-fired power plants and erecting natural gas-fired power plants. And so as the price of natural gas has fallen and as extraction methods have shifted so that the extraction methods that we use nowadays require many fewer coal miners, those two things in combination have reduced coal mining jobs. And those two things are probably not ever going to change. One of the things that has happened with the natural gas going down in cost is natural gas is a natural outcome of fracking, which is a method for extracting oil. When you pump high pressure heated water down into cracks in the earth to loosen up the oil and pump that oil out, one of the other things that you do is you liberate natural gas. So oil companies, while they're harvesting oil, they're also getting a lot of byproduct natural gas, and that natural gas, when it gets loaded onto the commodities market, drives down the price of natural gas. So we have this glut of natural gas that lowers the price of natural gas. It burns cleaner than coal. And so you've seen this shift in the mixture of fossil fuels that we use to power mainly electrical generating plants. And so basically it's economics and changing technology that has driven the coal miner out of business. And when politicians say something other than that, they're lying to us. And it just turns out that we can, because we're trained in statistics, we can run some numbers on it and see that once again, politicians are lying to us. Shocking. I know.
Hey, one question on code line 22.
Yeah.
You got the plus signs there.
Yeah.
Back when we were doing ANOVAs, there was a time when you could put an asterisk there.
Yes. And so
do we have that same option here?
you can, but what it's going to do is it's going to test the interaction, the correlation among the different variables. And we're actually interested in how does wellhead price, independent of these other things, influence coal jobs.
Okay.
So for regression, you want pluses in there.
Okay. And then looking at the summary stuff.
Yep.
3 asterisks, so all 3 are significant
Super
drivers.
significant. Yep.
But all in all, in a kind of bumper sticker statement, we could say the 2 prices and coal production explain improvements in productivity and lower prices are driving about, call it a third, or between a fourth and a third of the
Variation in coal
losses.
employment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not a great R-square value because there's probably all sorts of other things that are not in the Energy Information Agency database that are influencing coal. So for example, what is not in here is the number of coal-fired power plants relative to natural gas-fired power plants.
Oh yeah.
That might also be a significant predictor of coal employment.
Okay. And in the statistics profession, what's a good? It's kind of, I'm sure it's subjective, but what's a good braggable R-squared? I mean, you can say you got it. You got yourself a good model if you've got what range?
I would say, so as an ecologist, if you hit 50%, you're doing pretty well. Simply because ecological data are really noisy in many cases. I would argue that econometric data are also pretty noisy. So I would say if you're around 0.4, 0.5 or above, you're doing really well. If you're a physiologist, you should be seeing R-square values above 0.8 on a regular basis for meaningful data, simply because physiological data is much tighter than noisy econometric data and ecological data. So like Maddie is in this class. Maddie, are you there still?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. So when you do regressions on the kind of stuff that you do in cell molecular biology and physiology and things like that, you should expect those things to be fairly tight. If they're not, then you need to start questioning, methodology and whether or not you should really be paying attention to those things. So it is to a certain degree field specific, and now we're way over time. So I should actually just let you all go, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, because tomorrow is Thursday on a Friday, or Friday on a Friday schedule on a Thursday, because we're not having class on Friday.
Sounds good.
All right. I will see you guys tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.